Welcome to the history of England from 410 AD to just before the Norman invasion of 1066. Episode 9, King Offa's Mercia. One king was strong enough to bring Mercia to the fore. King Offa seems to have been just enough of an astute political animal to negotiate his way through the maze of Dark Ages intrigue. He also seems to be a money-making machine in more ways than one. The immediate effect of Offa seizing the throne in 757 from Beornred after Athelbald's death was that Northumbria refused to pay tribute and hold allegiance as it had before to the Bretwalder Athelbald. One of the first things Offa had to do was make sure the 30-plus tribes in Mercia acknowledged him as king. The Whikey, Gifler, Wigester, and many more obscure realms only known by name make up Mercia. We can surmise that these sub-kingdoms were on the decline, as there is no further major incidents with most of these names. Also, it may well be that they were not strictly tribes to start with, but reflected the early Anglo-Saxon raiders and were probably a loosely related band of people who had come raiding together and settled in with the local Britons. Offa had a movable court that usually wintered in Tamworth, which it did in the big winter of 763, a winter so cold fish died, with crops failing, leaving a bread shortage the following spring. There was another disastrous fire at York, as well as Winchester and London. By this time, the three minor kings in Kent had all died, and Sigurd, who had no family connection to any of the previous rulers, titles himself Rex Cante. But this is short-lived, because in 764 King Offa turns up in Kent, and there is yet another king called Hegebert, and along with an archbishop we see that Offa grants an estate to a noble. So King Offa is strengthening his position, probably through weakness in other places, and he is signing proclamations as overlord of Kent by 774. However, this should be tempered with the knowledge that Offa became annoyed at the Archbishop of Canterbury, with whom he was at constant loggerheads, and Offa confiscated some of the lands belonging to the Archbishop. We know something of Offa's palace, thanks to a description left to us which referred to it as one of the wonders of the age. We don't know the actual dimensions, but a similar type from Uppsala in Sweden measured 160 feet long. Although Offa's does not seem to be quite this length, and the medievalist Michael Wood has suggested the likeliest site in Tamworth just above the current church, which it is thought had an artificial foundation. The inference that it was a wonder suggests a high degree of decoration, and as bling was the order of the day, this would run to wall hangings as well as an outside carved timber adornments. There were other places where Offa is known to have hunting lodges and temporary residences, as he moved about his province, meeting his bishops and nobles and dispensing the law, and collecting his taxes. Croft Hill, twixt Narborough and Stony Stanton in Leicestershire, is one such place where the king would arrive at a predetermined time. Croft Hill, like the Skyrack in Leeds, was still a meeting place centuries after Offa was dead, which makes it prime for one of the moot or local council gatherings, and may well have pagan associations going back to the Iron Age or further. One item of great influence for nearly 700 years that Offa left us was the silver penny. Money had not disappeared, it had, however, lessened in circulation, and this must have hampered trade, because without the neutral tokens that are currency, there is little the farmer or peasant can do to improve their lot. To deal in grain just requires a standard measure, but is still limiting, and corn or barley only lasts perhaps 3 or 4 years at most. If you can afford to trade in a full quantity of sheep or cow, then all well and good, but not everyone wants or needs an ox, and getting a good deal for minor items like repairing a fence or farm implement leaves the poor with no reserve in times of shortage. You can't save food and lodgings for a rainy day, but you can save a silver penny. The money that had been available was of poor quality and was in all probability not trusted, and if a currency is not trusted, it is effectively worthless. The coin has little intrinsic value. It is the matter of saying, I think such and such work is worth so many of those coins. If the coins are not there, it does not mean the work is worthless. On the contrary, that work holds its value. But if you have no standard method of representing that value in a neutral form like a copper or silver coin, then the poor are the people hardest hit, a point most often overlooked by people who do not understand that money is only a token that represents a stored value of something else. Northumbria had a copper coin, however, it varied in weight and quality, so can be disregarded as of any long-term note. It was not trusted in a widespread manner. Here we see King Offa, the statesman and economist, at work. He seems to have realised that if trade was to be conducted, then it needed the neutrality of a staple currency, in this case a silver penny. The first to be minted were excellent quality and showed Offa in the manner of the Roman emperors. Whether there is an attempt at a likeness to King Offa is disputed, but no matter. What counts is that there is regularity and a coinage that could be trusted. This will have taken years to establish, but one of the noted effects will have been to increase trade. First within the kingdom of Mercia, and then, as the coins become trusted, they will have circulated in the neighbouring kingdoms, who knew about Offa. This would have increased their usability and again helped to increase trade. Indeed, one aspect that has intrigued me is the fact that the pennies actually increased in weight, which would have reduced any inflationary effects of a bubble economy and enhanced their usability. There was also a penny struck that had the portrait of his queen, Cynethryth, in place of his, again in the manner of the Roman tradition of honouring the mother of the emperor or the empress, in this case his queen. It is the only example in the Dark Ages of this happening, but it does show that women were held in high regard and respected, if not as true equals, at least as worthy in themselves. The silver penny is the lasting legacy that Offa gave the economy. However, a very intriguing item is a gold coin that Offa had struck so as to be able to trade with the Caliphate of the Levant. It bears the stamp of Offa Rex. It is an imitation in solid gold of a dinar from the time of the Caliph Al-Mansur from 774 AD. None have been found in England, but the near coin, the mancus, were valued at 30 silver pennies. The mancus was used in accounting in the 9th century in England, and this gold dinar is similar. The moneyer who struck the coin obviously knew no Arabic, as there are mistakes, and the inscription is not totally correct, although to read some information on websites you could be forgiven for thinking otherwise. However, it is clear that it is aimed at allowing trade with the Caliphate and that Offa, a staunch Christian, was confident in his own standing. Whether this held in the Levant is unrecorded, and those who could read would be puzzled by the calligraphy. However, the coin was probably taken on weight value anyway, and previous trading by merchants may have held them in good credit for the amount of gold it contained. Again, this is where Offa seems to have been aware that credibility is all where money is concerned. It is no good just having something that looks right. It must, at this period, weigh correctly. This will ensure that the Arab in the souk will trust you when you next meet. Likewise, the Cheol in the midweek market is going to trust your specie as being of the price associated with the sale or purchase. It's worth noting that there is great play made of the fact that at this time the Vikings traded with Constantinople and the Levant. How much of this trade was generally from the Netherlands, Flanders and England seems to be left out of the discussion, and cloth is not something that lasts many centuries. But we have found items at archaeological sites that originate in the East, and so trade we know was taking place. The Staffordshire Viking hoard, which is dated to something at the end of the 7th century, containing garnets from Ceylon, showing that trade interconnected even in the period after the fall of Rome. Offa and Charlemagne Charles the Great of the Franks, exchanged contracts of trade. In one, Charlemagne requests in return for the black stones, possibly lava stones for millers to grind corn in a watermill at Tamworth, being made to an exact specified size, that in return the cloth being delivered should meet the standard Frankish length and width. This was all towards the end of Offa's reign. There had actually been a break in relations between the two monarchs. This appears to have come about due to Beorhtric, who seems to have had Offa's backing to become King of Wessex, and Egbert, who didn't, going into exile in Charlemagne's court, thus putting the two on a collision course, and trade is the thing that suffered, along with the strained diplomatic relations. The other major legacy left to us is Offa's Dyke, a rampart that ran from sea to sea, basically preventing easy access to what is now England, but was still then Mercia, from Wales. There are large stretches that it covered that were known as the Marches. This translates as borderlands, and raiding parties from Wales into Mercia were frequent. That the two sides were basically at war is known from the number of times the Anglo-Saxons went into Wales with an army. However, the inference can be drawn from the building of the Dyke that raiding for cattle, sheep and crops was mainly from Wales into Mercia. Be under no illusion, when an army went into Wales from Mercia or Wessex or wherever, they would plunder and come back with cattle, sheep and probably slaves, as any captured enemy at this period in history anywhere in the world would be expected to be enslaved. Slavery was restricted to heathens, that is, those who hadn't been made Christians. This was mandated by the Pope. Christians were forbidden to enslave other Christians, which may well be why the practice of slaving was slowly dying out and was being replaced by serfs who were nearly but not quite slaves. Offa seems to have been a political creature as well as a military king. In fact, his early exploits as military campaign leader he met with mixed results, but all the time he was willing to bend with the wind of politics, which usually works out cheaper than war, and is probably why the Dyke was built. We don't know exactly when he built the Dyke. In fact, it is only conjecture from the name that it was he who had it constructed, but it was done when he, or whoever, held enough power and money to do so. Michael Wood suggests around 787, and as he is one of the best authorities, I won't argue. It seems to have been designed to limit the access of the Welsh to trade and to stop their thieving and robbery. There are gateways at intervals where it is thought sally gates would be. The whole earthwork was about 25 feet high on the Welsh side, and a wooden palisade probably ran the whole length along the top, which may well have had a wooden lookout post at regular intervals. Also, beacons could be lit to alert the people designated to the defence. This must have been extremely costly, but Offa's exchequer was probably by this time in good order, and any costs from building were likely to be offset by increased tax revenues. We know from the archaeological evidence that many different gangs of workers were employed in the construction, so these would be drafted for the kingdom, in all likelihood doing their military or pastoral service for their thane. It was a massive undertaking which would have also require some good organisational skills. Offa was now treated on nearly equal terms with Charlemagne, the only king in Europe to be given such a status, and it had at one point nearly come to marriage. The Frankish king had proposed his son Charles be married to one of Offa's daughters in 789. The Mercian immediately saw his political chance and agreed, on the condition that his own son Ecgfrith marry Bertha, a daughter of Charlemagne. But the Frank balked at the marriage of one of his daughters to Ecgfrith, despite the fact that Ecgfrith had more ancient lineage than the upstart Charlemagne. One can't help thinking this was arrogance on his part, as his royal lineage went back as far as his grandfather, Charles Martel, who had only been mayor of the court. That there was more behind the breakdown in negotiations seems to be probable. Egbert was still in residence at the court, and until matters were resolved, relations would always be frosty. But it was Charlemagne who closed the Frankish ports to the Mercian traders. The only thing that can be said is this hits both sides, not just the person being closed out. At home, Offa was now Bretwalda. He had had his son Ecgfrith anointed king in a ceremony by an archbishop, and so by association having the papal blessing. The old king had steered Mercia through many different ups and downs. He had made the kingdom wealthy through stable government and a natural talent to not meddle when he could avoid it. One of the reasons the silver penny may well have been kept as permanent coinage after his reign, apart from its handy size, was the fact that King Offa very slightly increased its weight during his reign. At the time, this will have had the effect of increasing its value, and this is the opposite of what happens with most other currencies throughout history. Traders will have noticed this from handling older, lighter weight coins and thought, this is good money. Confidence is the backbone of a currency, so one that gives better value makes it strong. Also, that it was silver helps, as there seems to have been a good supply of silver at this time, coming from various mines in Europe. This in itself would help with enriching the populace, as the metal required for this commodity money would be more freely available, and hence trade would have increased, making goods more widely spread and allowing the average person to accumulate a little wealth. It is also worth noting that silver, along with copper, is usually the metal used for devaluing gold. So a coin made from silver is not as valuable in the first place, and lead, being so much heavier, is easier to detect if someone is trying to deceive. Also, Offa has resisted the temptation to devalue it with copper, all adding to the needed ingredient, confidence. A word of caution. This is not a money economy. That didn't happen until the late 16th century in England. It is just there is money in circulation. Always keep this distinction. Much work will still have been carried out for food, lodging and clothing. The farm labourer will have worked for the equivalent of the monetary value, working for payment in kind, not actual money. But the coinage is there. Astute workers will have been paid in cash when it was available, so they could accumulate savings for the bad times, or even to better their lot. The supremacy of Mercia was, however, compromised from overseas by Charlemagne, who was the son of Pepin the Short and grandson of Charles Martel. He was the bloke who stopped the northwards advance of the Muslims in the Battle of Tours in 732 AD. As a consequence, the Franks were now the most powerful kingdom in northern Europe, and Charlemagne's court had been a refuge for enemies of Mercia, hence the probable break in diplomacy and trade. The Frankish connection with the English kingdoms in general had been brought about by the missionary monk Boniface, who had gone to Myres and started a monastery there. As a consequence, England and its affairs came to the notice of the Franks. How much of the harbouring of the exiles from different kingdoms around Mercia and in Mercia was driven by the designs of these exiles to weaken and strengthen Northumbria or Kent or wherever is open to much debate. But the upshot was a continual courting and distrust between them. At the end of the 7th century, events that led to the Franks becoming so dominant on the continent was to take place. Pepin II, or Pepin the Fat, no, I didn't make that up, had conquered parts of Frisia and decided that it would be to the Frankish advantage if the Frisians became Christian. He sent an envoy, Willibrord, to Rome to be consecrated bishop and receive the pallium, which meant he could ordain other bishops. Willibrord met with little success in the Frisian-held lowlands, but Pepin II gave him an estate near Utrecht in Frankish-held Frisia, and Willibrord established monasteries in the area. This is when Boniface arrived on the scene early in the 8th century. Later, in 786, Pope Hadrian I sent a delegation from Rome to England to renew and update the canonical rules. This introduced the notion that illegitimate children could no longer inherit their father's inheritance, including succession to the crown. There were also rules for the protection of the poor against injustice and the amount of payment of tithes to the church. The delegation toured the country dealing with separate kingdoms on an individual basis. Offa, at this point, had tried getting Mercia its own archbishop. This wasn't granted. But also in 787, the year the delegation visits Mercia, is when his son Ecgfrith is crowned joint king. This anointing is the first confirmed occasion in England of this happening, and it being done while Offa is still alive shows he was attempting to smooth a transition of suzerainty while showing his strong Christian faith. The trade links with the Franks were reopened, partly to allow pilgrims a direct route down to Rome, and the Pope was instrumental in getting the talks underway. This also led to goods being exchanged, Charlemagne being keen to ensure his traders were treated fairly. There was an agreement over the length of cloth being up to standard. The cloth in question was called siege. I've tried confirming that this is the origin of the word serge of a later time, but without success. But it is suspiciously close. The denizens of Mercia were exporting cloth, and cloth at this time was an important foreign currency earner. Then, on 29th of July 796, King Offa died, and before the year was out, Ecgfrith also died. The kingdom passed to Cenwulf, who was in a civil war with Kent, where he appointed Cuthred king to hold Kent in 798. Before his death, Offa had married his daughter off to Beorhtric, King of Wessex, to ensure the subordination of the kingdom. With Beorhtric's death in 802, the kingdom thus passed to Egbert, who refused to recognise Mercian overlordship. The authority of Mercia was now lost, and for the next few years, again no kingdom dominated. In Northumbria, also in 796, Ethelred, their king, was slain by his own men, and Eardwulf was anointed king at St. Peter's, York. Ethelred had been a pawn for Offa to manoeuvre as he deemed fit. This was now ended, so the rustle of fortune's shroud is billowing across the land. If you found this gradely, please thumbs up. I publish new videos every Monday with occasionally bonus episodes on a Thursday, and also spread the word on social media outlets. Hit the subscribe button to get the latest episodes and ring that bellaroonies to get reminders. Also, I would appreciate any recommendations on other media like Parler, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, history forums, you know, the usual stuff. Thank you.